Senator Mike Lee, who joins us right now. Senator, thank you for joining us. How is it going thus far, and are we getting a sense from opening statements what your colleagues are getting at? I'm sure Democrats in this 11-9 breakdown of the committee, the 9 votes there, have tipped their hand or not tipped their hand about whether they would support Gorsuch, or what are you hearing?
Based on the statements that have been made so far by my Democratic colleagues, it does appear that some Democrats on the committee are going to come out guns a-blazing for Judge Gorsuch. I think it's unfortunate. I think many of the slurs against him, the attacks against him, are unfounded and unfair. But I also think they will be disproven by the events of the week. Disproven based on the testimony that we expect to hear from Judge Gorsuch, and disproven by Judge Gorsuch's outstanding track record of jurisprudence, which focuses on figuring out what the law is rather than on what he wishes it might say.
You know, Senator, your colleague Lindsey Graham has said of the judge, he's the single best thing this president has done. What do you make of that? Because he's a frequent critic of this president.
Well, look, I think Judge Gorsuch is a fantastic pick. If that's what he means, then I agree with it wholeheartedly. I do think this was a great pick. You couldn't find somebody better, or if you did, it'd be difficult to find somebody better who more closely falls after this mold of Justice Scalia in his desire to figure out what the law means, in his willingness to stick to the text of the law, the text of the Constitution, in answering questions brought before the court.
Senator, is it your sense that it will just take a majority of senators to approve Judge Gorsuch, or do you think that it will involve the 60-vote threshold the Democrats seem to be pining for?
Look, Neil, first of all, I believe that this guy is going to do so well at this hearing this week. I think he's going to get 60 votes. One way or another, Judge Gorsuch will be confirmed.
Okay, because as you're probably aware, a number of liberal groups have promised that any Democratic senator who votes for the judge is going to be facing a primary battle. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that's interesting that they've made that statement so far. Interesting that they feel apparently so threatened by the mere possibility of having someone else on the Supreme Court who wants to interpret the law and the Constitution based on what it actually says, rather than on the basis of what some liberal interest group wants.
All right. As if we're competing with air traffic over the Capitol, sir, I do want to get into some of the popular attack lines that many Democrats have been planning to focus on with the judge, including that he's too much in the hip pocket of business. I'm exaggerating the point to make it, but that's their point, that he's made a number of decisions that have benefited companies when it comes to environmental rules, when it comes to overtime rules, when it comes to paying sick workers if they're out a disproportionate amount of time. Is it your sense as well that that is going to be his Achilles heel, that Democrats who might be thinking about supporting him will stop or pause because of that?
Well, look, I know that they want to make it about that. I know there are Democrats on the committee who are wanting desperately to make this about Judge Gorsuch being supposedly in the pocket of this or that type of party. It just isn't true. Look, if you read his opinions, if you spend the hours and hours that I've spent reading Judge Gorsuch opinions, you'll find case after case in which he has ruled for the little guy, in which he has ruled for the David fighting against the Goliath. The fact is that the real consistent line that you'll see in his cases is not one that's based on the type of plaintiff or defendant in any case. It is instead based on who's got the better argument under the law. Sometimes that's the big guy, sometimes that's the little guy. But he is as dedicated to blind justice as anyone the federal judiciary has ever seen, and I'm very proud to support his nomination.
Senator, I know you've been wrapped up, justifiably so, in these Gorsuch hearings, but separately, these hearings involving FBI Director James Comey and NSA Director Mike Rogers have been going on, and they're already prompting a number of responses from no less than Eric Holder, the former Attorney General, tweeting out that the intel hearing today, bottom line so far, 1, Trump campaign is under investigation, and 2, Trump tweets about Obama are bogus. He's referring to the latter one there about the former president tapping his phones. I want to focus on that latter comment. Do you agree with James Comey and Mr. Rogers that there seems to be little evidence of that tapping story?
Look, there are those who are serving on those committees, those in the hearing that you're just referring to, who are far more familiar with this than I am. let me tell you what concerns me in this area. I think it's pretty well established that there wasn't a wiretap as such along the lines of what President Trump might have been referring to. But I think it's also possible President Trump might have been referring to something else. Perhaps an order issued pursuant to Section 702 of the FISA amendments, one that was aimed at an operative of a foreign government, but incidentally brought in some U.S. communications involving U.S. citizens, some of whom perhaps might have been affiliated with the Trump campaign. I don't know. But let me tell you this. There is grave risk in a threat identified by the Church Committee hearings several decades ago, hearings I referred to in my book, Our Lost Constitution, which is we have to remember that every presidential administration from FDR through Nixon used our intelligence gathering agencies to engage in political espionage. The only reason that list didn't go further than that is that Nixon was the administration immediately preceding the work that committee did. This is always a risk. We should always be on high alert, and we should always make sure that those who are in charge of collecting intelligence are not engaging in domestic political espionage. And I want to get to the bottom of what, if anything, happened here.
Do you think that there's so little evidence to support that the wiretapping charge that President Trump raised that now you're being the most judicious and polite about it, sir, but I mean, many of your colleagues are saying the president is wrong. What do you say?
Well, look, if we're talking about an actual wiretap, a Title III wiretap, that does not appear to have happened here.
So
but
why
again,
would the president say that? It does make you wonder why he would say it. Right?
Look, sometimes people use imprecise language. Sometimes people use terms of art to refer to something else. I don't know what the president was referring to. I have no idea. I doubt he would say something like that unless he at least thought something was occurring in that vein. But I'm not going to speak for him. You're going to have to speak to him and to his staff. But what I'm saying is we shouldn't be too quick to assume that everything going on within the federal government is harmless, to assume that there isn't political espionage going on. So I would like to get to the bottom of it, and I'm not willing to assume it's simply because there does not appear to have been a Title III wiretap. That necessarily means that nothing happened here.
The only reason why I mention that, sir, not to badger the point, is that many have argued that that comment, that charge, whether genuinely felt or passed along to the president, has now hurt his agenda up on the Hill. It's complicated the health care passage. It's also complicated, maybe even delayed the tax cut stuff. Do you agree with that?
It certainly hasn't helped, but I want to make very clear that the fact that this statement was said shouldn't slow anything else down. We should pay careful attention to this comment. We should look into what, if anything, is behind it. But in the meantime, we do need to focus on repealing Obamacare. We do need to focus on achieving real, lasting tax reform for the American people. We do need to focus on whittling down the burgeoning administrative regulatory state, which is costing American consumers $2 trillion a year, the overwhelming majority of which is borne by poor and middle-class Americans, who pay for those regulatory compliance costs through diminished wages, unemployment, underemployment, and higher prices on goods and services, everything they buy.
Finally, sir, and you've been very patient with my questioning, everything seems to look good. That's always dangerous because I think yesterday at this time, Duke's prospects looked pretty good in the NCAA tournament. But that whatever the odds are that Gorsuch will be accepted, they seem to be strong now that he will become the next Supreme Court justice. And that right now I'm talking to the Supreme Court justice after him, that you're in a half a handful of potential candidates for that next justiceship that opens up. Would you be interested if offered?
Look, anybody who has watched the Supreme Court throughout his entire life, like I have, would be disingenuous if they said anything other than yes, absolutely. If asked, I'd consider it, and would be honored to even be considered.
You know, that is such a straightforward, honest answer. I'm flummoxed, Senator, but thank you. Very good seeing you again. I appreciate it.
Thank you.